For months, people studied the Nancy Guthrie ransom notes for the obvious things. The handwriting, the ink, the paper, the folds, the wording of the demand, the message about money, the second note that changed the whole tone of the case. But retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente believes one of the biggest clues may not have been hidden in the paper at all. It may have been hiding in one word. According to the transcript, Clemente focused on the pronouns inside.
On February 6, 2026, a second note arrived at a Tucson television station. The first note had been a business transaction, $4 million in Bitcoin, a deadline, a threat. But this second note was different. We did not fully grasp the seriousness of her physical conditions. It read, "We never intended to hurt her. This was not our intention. She perished shortly after she was taken. We believe it was heart-related. She is buried in nature now." The first note was about money. The second note was about something else entirely. It was an apology wrapped in a confession, a strange softness draped over an unthinkable act. And in that shift, from demand to explanation, from threat to grief, retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente saw something the public had missed. He didn't focus on the handwriting. He didn't focus on the paper or the ink. He focused on one word buried inside the first note, a word that didn't belong, a word that may have exposed the person behind the mask. "You will not be able to contact me from here on out." Not us. Not the group. Me. Before we go deeper into what the records actually show, make sure you're subscribed to the Crime Infinity, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. The first note was a performance. It opened with, "Hello, Savannah. We have your mother, Nancy." It demanded $4 million in Bitcoin. It warned that law enforcement would not be able to help. It used plural pronouns repeatedly. We, our, us, creating the image of a coordinated operation, a team, a crew, a group of people working together with a single purpose. That language was designed to do one thing: make the threat feel larger than it really was.
The notes. The writer repeatedly used group language like "we" and "our." But then, in one place, wrote, "Contact me." Clemente called that a possible slip-up, suggesting one person may have written the notes while pretending to be a group. That is the kind of detail most people would read past. One tiny word, not a full confession, not a name, not an address, not a fingerprint, just me. But in behavioral analysis, small words can matter. They can show where a person's real thinking breaks through the story they are trying to create. They can reveal when a writer is forcing one identity on the page while another identity slips out by accident. And in this case, Clemente believes the notes may have been written to sound bigger than the person behind them really was. That changes the question. Because if a note says, "we," the reader imagines a group, a team, multiple people, a larger operation, a kidnapping crew, a plan with more than one person behind it. That language creates fear because it makes the threat feel wider. It tells the family and investigators that they may not be dealing with one person acting alone. It suggests coordination, planning, backup, and shared responsibility. But then comes the word that does not fit. Contact me. Not contact us. Not reach out to our group. Not follow our instructions. Me. One person. One voice. One writer. One crack in the...
A group sounds organized. A group sounds harder to catch. A group sounds like it has backup, control, and power. But then came the second note, and the mask began to slip. Clemente, who spent over 2 decades with the FBI, walked through both notes line by line on Brian Innan's podcast.
One mistake changed the feeling of the notes. The other changed the number of people behind them. Together, those mistakes may be the beginning of the truth. Because sometimes the most important clue in a case is not what the writer meant to say. It is what they could not stop themselves from revealing. Jim Clemente was not looking at the ransom notes the way most people looked at them. Most people read a ransom note for the demand. How much money? What instructions were given? Was there a threat? Was there proof that Nancy was alive? Was there anything in the wording that revealed where she might be? That is the normal reaction, because ransom notes are frightening on the surface. They are meant to be frightening. They are written to make the family feel pressure, to make investigators move fast, and to make the person behind the note seem powerful. But Clemente looked past the surface. According to the transcript, Clemente is a retired FBI profiler with decades of experience in the Bureau's behavioral unit, and his focus was not handwriting, ink, paper, or fingerprints. His focus was the language itself, word choice, repeated phrases, tone, rhythm, and the hidden meaning behind what the writer chose to say. That is what makes his analysis different. A handwriting expert studies the shape of letters. A lab technician studies physical evidence. A detective studies timeline and opportunity. But a profiler studies the person behind the behavior. The note is not just a note. It is a decision. Every word inside it was chosen by someone. Every sentence came from a mind trying to create fear, control, confusion, or distance. Even if the writer tried to disguise themselves, they still had to use language. And language can betray people in ways they never expect. That is what Clemente was searching for. Not the message the writer wanted everyone to see. The message hiding underneath. In the transcript, Brian Enton asks Clemente what he sees in the notes that everyone else missed. Clemente does not drift into vague possibilities. He gives his theory directly. One person wrote both notes, not a group, and not two people working together. Then he adds that money may not have been the real motive behind the notes. That is a major claim. Not because it solves the case.
He looked for what most people miss. Not the surface meaning, but the behavioral evidence hiding underneath. People rarely lie perfectly, Clemente has explained.
He does not treat it like a random typo. He treats it like a window. A small one, but still a window. According to the transcript, Clemente said people rarely lie perfectly. When someone builds a false story, they must maintain it sentence after sentence and word after word. Under pressure, small pieces of truth can slip out before the person catches themselves. That explanation is simple, but powerful. If someone is pretending to be part of a group, they have to keep pretending every time they refer to themselves. They have to say, They have to say, They have to say, our. Every time, one wrong word weakens the performance. It is like someone telling a story and accidentally saying, when they were supposed to be speaking for a team. It may not prove everything, but it makes investigators ask whether the team ever existed. That question matters because the number of people behind the notes changes the whole direction of the investigation.
When someone builds a false story, they must maintain it sentence after sentence, word after word. Under pressure, small pieces of truth can slip out before the person catches themselves. The writer of these notes had been building the image of a group. We have your mother. We will be holding her. We never intended to hurt her. But then, in the first note, the writer wrote, "You will not be able to contact me from here on out." One word, a single pronoun. Me, not us, not the group. Me. Clemente called that a possible slip-up, suggesting one person may have written the notes while pretending to be a group. The writer used plural language repeatedly. We, our, us, but then, in one place, wrote "contact me." That is the kind of detail most people would read past. One tiny word, not a full confession, not a name, not an address, not a fingerprint, just me. But in behavioral analysis, small words can matter.
Mask. That is why Clemente's observation matters. According to the transcript, the notes used plural pronouns several times, but the words appeared once. Clemente believed that single change could show the writer accidentally dropped the fake group identity and revealed the singular person behind the message. A ransom note is supposed to control the reader. It tells the family what to do. It tells them what not to do. It tells them how much money is needed. It tells them what will happen if they disobey. It is designed to create panic, obedience, and fear. But while the note tries to control the family, it can also reveal the writer. That is the irony. The person writing the note may think they are hiding behind threats, demands, and false language. They may think the note makes them sound careful. They may think plural words make them sound more dangerous. But language is not always easy to control. People leak truth through habit. They reveal themselves through rhythm. They repeat words they do not notice. They shift tone when emotion gets involved. They use one wrong pronoun because for a split second, they stop performing. That is what Clemente sees in the word.
They can show where a person's real thinking breaks through the story they are trying to create. The first note sounds like business. Cold business. The kind of message people expect in a kidnapping case. Give money. Follow instructions. Do what we say if you want the person back. It had the shape of a demand. But then came the second note, and the tone changed. The money language disappeared. The threat evaporated. In its place was something stranger, an explanation, a justification, almost a confession. She perished shortly after she was taken. We believe it was heart-related. She is buried in nature now. That is not ordinary ransom language. A real ransom demand has a purpose. It does not need poetry. It does not need emotional phrasing. It does not need strange softness. It needs pressure.
Money was truly the central motive. That shift matters. A normal ransom demand is usually direct. Here is what we want. Here is how you pay. Here is what happens if you call police. Here is proof the victim is alive. Here is the deadline. Everything is controlled by money and logistics. But the second note, as described in the transcript, does not continue in that same business-like direction. It becomes darker, stranger, and more emotional. The phrase, "with nature now," does not sound like ordinary ransom pressure. It sounds like someone trying to communicate something else. That is why Clemente questions the motive. If money was the goal, why move away from money? If this was a team of kidnappers, why does the voice feel so singular? If the writer wanted to sound like a group, why did me slip into the note? These questions do not solve the case. They do not identify the writer. They do not prove what happened to Nancy. But they narrow the way investigators may think about the notes. And narrowing matters. In a case with too many theories, narrowing is progress. The public may want one dramatic answer, but real cases often move through tiny reductions. Investigators cut away what does not fit. They test each theory. They ask which explanation survives the evidence. Could this be a group? Could it be two writers? Could the word me be a deliberate trick? Could the notes be fake? Could the money demand be misdirection? Each question matters. But Chapter 1 begins with the word because.
The person writing it wants the family to act fast, stay afraid, and follow instructions. So they make the demand clear. How much money? Where to send it? When to send it? What happens if police are involved? How the family will know the victim is alive? What the next step is? That is the logic of a ransom. But the second note does not stay inside that logic. It moves away from payment. It moves away from a clear exchange. It moves into a phrase that feels almost symbolic, buried with nature now. Those words are not ordinary ransom words. They do not sound like a kidnapper trying to keep a victim alive as leverage. They sound like someone trying to say something else. Maybe to soften the message. Maybe to hide the truth. Maybe to control how Nancy's family imagined her. Maybe to create confusion. Maybe to give the writer power over the story. That is what caught Clemente's attention. Not only what the notes demanded, but how they changed. A note demanding money says one thing. A note saying someone is buried with nature now says something very different. And that difference matters because tone can reveal motive. One mind wrote the demand. One mind changed the tone. One mind used we. One mind slipped into me.
People working together. He believed the pronoun slip was one of the clearest indicators that the writer was acting alone. That conclusion does not end the investigation, but it gives investigators a thread. And in a case like Nancy Guthrie's, a thread can matter. A thread can pull apart a false story. A thread can change where detectives look. A thread can move the case from a possible group operation to a lone writer. A thread can make ransom look less like motive and more like disguise. That is why one word can change the whole feel of the case. Before Clemente's analysis, the ransom notes may have sounded like they came from multiple people. After his analysis, they sound more like one person trying to sound like multiple people. That is a very different threat. A group creates one kind of fear. A lone writer creates another. A group may be organized. A lone writer may be obsessive. A group may be after money. A lone writer may be after control, attention, fear, or emotional damage. The transcript does not prove which motive is right, but it makes clear that Clemente does not believe money was necessarily the real reason behind the notes. That is why this chapter should leave the audience with a new question. Not just who wrote the notes. Why were they written this way? Why pretend to be a group? Why demand money in one note, then shift tone in another? Why say, me? After saying, we? Why create a ransom frame if the deeper motive may not have been ransom at all? That is the mystery inside the mystery. Nancy Guthrie is still the center. She is not just the subject of the notes. She is the missing woman whose life those words were built around. Every line, every pronoun, every strange phrase matters because her family is still waiting for the truth. The notes are not just documents. They are pieces of the story of what happened to her. And somewhere inside them, Clemente believes the right.
This is where the case becomes psychologically darker. A group ransom operation suggests planning for profit. A lone writer using ransom language may suggest something else. A need for control, a need to frighten, a desire to manipulate the family, a desire to create confusion, a personal motive wrapped in the costume of a financial crime. Clemente does not treat the pronoun shift like a random typo. He treats it like a window. A small one, but still a window. According to his analysis, the notes do not show the seams of group writing.
He does not simply point to the slip, call it important, and move on. He tests it. He asks what else could explain it. He asks whether the word could have come from two writers, a larger group, or even a deliberate trick planted to mislead investigators. That is what makes his analysis stronger. He does not accept the most dramatic answer just because it sounds good. He works through the alternatives. According to the transcript, Clemente considered whether two people could have written the notes together, whether a group could have been involved, or whether the word me could have been placed there on purpose as a fake clue. After testing those possibilities, he still concluded that one person wrote both notes alone. That conclusion matters because it narrows the meaning of the notes. If a group wrote them, investigators would be dealing with a coordinated message. If two people wrote them, the language might contain signs of two minds blending together. If the word was planted on purpose, then the writer was trying to manipulate investigators at a very subtle level. But if one person wrote both notes alone, then the notes become more personal, more direct, more revealing. The first possibility Clemente tests is two writers. Could one person have written most of the note while another added one sentence? Could one writer have used group language while the other slipped and wrote me? On the surface, that is possible. Two people can work on one message. Two people can agree on a plan. Two people can pass a note back and forth, each adding parts of it. But Clemente says that when two people write together, the writing usually shows seams. A seam is where one style meets another. One person writes long sentences. Another writes short ones. One person sounds formal. Another sounds casual. One person explains too much. Another keeps things blunt. One person uses emotional language. Another uses direct threats. Even if they try to sound alike, their patterns often show through. That is because writing carries habit. People have rhythms they do not notice. They have favorite structures. They have ways of connecting thoughts. They have words they repeat. They have ways of sounding calm, angry, careful, rushed, or rehearsed. When two people write together, those habits can clash. According to the transcript, Clemente looked for those kinds of seams in the two ransom notes but did not find them. He believed the sentence structure, phrasing style, rhythm, and the way ideas connected stayed consistent from the first note to the second. That is why he does not believe two people wrote them. The notes do not feel like two voices stitched together. They feel like one voice moving through both messages.
When two people write together, the writing usually shows where one style meets another. One person writes long sentences, another writes short ones. One person sounds formal, another sounds casual. One person explains too much, another keeps things blunt. Even if they try to sound alike, their patterns often show through. Clemente looked for those kinds of seams in the two ransom notes and did not find them. He believed the sentence structure, phrasing, style, rhythm, and the way ideas connected stayed consistent from the first note to the second. That is why he does not believe two people wrote them. The notes do not feel like two voices stitched together. They feel like one voice moving through both messages. Clemente also considered whether the word me could have been planted on purpose as a fake clue.
Me is the face underneath. The third possibility is the trick theory. What if the writer intentionally planted the word me to make investigators believe there was only one person? What if a real group wanted to look like one person? What if the slip was not a slip at all, but a clever fake clue? That sounds possible at first. Criminals do mislead investigators. People stage scenes. People plant evidence. People write false notes. People try to make police chase the wrong person, the wrong motive, or the wrong number of offenders. So Clemente has to take the trick theory seriously. But according to the transcript, he does not find it convincing because the word me is too small and buried. He argues that deliberate fake clues usually have to be noticeable enough to influence investigators, while this pronoun shift was subtle enough that most people could read past it entirely. That is a strong argument. If someone plants a clue, they usually want it found. They want investigators to see it. They want it to push the case in a certain direction. A planted clue that no one notices does not do much. So why plant a tiny pronoun change that may never be seen? Why risk creating an inconsistency in the note for such a small reward? Why trust that the right kind of language expert would eventually catch it and draw exactly the conclusion the writer wanted? That is too fragile as a strategy. A deliberate trick usually has a bigger footprint. It points more loudly. It creates a clearer false trail. This word does not do that. It sits quietly, almost hidden, almost ordinary. That is why it feels more like a mistake than a planted clue. A real slip often hides in plain sight. It is not dramatic because the writer did not mean to reveal it. It is not highlighted because the writer did not know it mattered. It is just there. One word that did not match the mask. That is exactly the kind of detail a profiler looks for.
What if a real group wanted to look like one person? What if the slip was not a slip at all, but a clever piece of misdirection? That sounds possible at first. Criminals do mislead investigators. People stage scenes. People plant evidence. People try to make police chase the wrong person, the wrong motive, or the wrong number of offenders. But Clemente does not find the trick theory convincing because the word me is too small and buried. Deliberate fake clues usually have to be noticeable enough to influence investigators. This pronoun shift was subtle enough that most people could read past it entirely. If someone plants a clue, they usually want it found. They want investigators to see it. They want to push the case in a certain direction. A planted clue that no one notices does not do much. So why plant a tiny pronoun change that may never be seen? Why risk creating an inconsistency in the note for such a small reward? Why trust that the right kind of language expert would eventually catch it and draw exactly the conclusion the writer wanted? That is too fragile as a strategy. A deliberate trick usually has a bigger footprint. It points more loudly. It creates a clearer false trail. This word does not do that. It sits quietly, almost hidden, almost ordinary. That is why it feels more like a mistake than a planted clue. A real slip often hides in plain sight.
That is why Clemente ruled out the idea of a deliberate trick. According to the transcript, he argued that if someone were planting a fake clue, they would usually make it more noticeable. This slip was too small and too buried to be useful as a planted deception, and it sat inside the note quietly enough that many people could read past it. That point is important. A planted clue is meant to be found. It is meant to push investigators. It is meant to create a false road. But a hidden pronoun does not behave like a planted clue. It behaves like an accident. It behaves like something the writer did not realize they had revealed. And if it was an accident, then it may be more valuable than a deliberate message. Deliberate messages are controlled. Accidents are not. A deliberate ransom demand tells investigators what the writer wants them to think. A slip may tell investigators what the writer forgot to hide. That is the difference. The notes may have been built to say, there is a group. The slip may say, there is one person. The notes may have been built to say, this is about money. The tone shift may say, it may be about something else. The notes may have been built to create panic. The language may help investigators create a profile. That is why the slip could narrow the case. If Clemente is right, investigators may not need to imagine a large kidnapping group writing these messages together. They may need to focus on one writer, one voice, one person who used group language to create fear and distance. That does not mean one person did every part of the crime.
It is not dramatic because the writer did not mean to reveal it. It is not highlighted because the writer did not know it mattered. It is just there. One word that did not match the mask. One mind wrote the demand. One mind changed the tone. One mind used we. One mind slipped into me. Clemente's reasoning follows a clear path. Two writers. Unlikely because the notes do not show seams. A group. Unlikely because the notes do not show competing voices or compromise. A deliberate trick. Unlikely because the slip is too subtle and risky to be useful as a planted clue. That leaves one explanation standing. One person wrote both notes alone from beginning to end.
Clemente's reasoning follows a clear path. Two writers? Unlikely, because the notes do not show seams. A group? Unlikely, because the notes do not show competing voices or compromise. A deliberate trick? Unlikely, because the slip is too subtle and risky to be useful as a planted clue. That leaves one explanation standing. One person wrote both notes. Alone, from beginning to end. According to the transcript, when Brian Enton asked Clemente to say it plainly, Clemente said one person wrote both notes, with no partner helping choose the words and no group deciding what to threaten or promise. That is the moment the analysis lands. Not with shouting, not with drama, with quiet certainty. And in a case like this, quiet certainty can be more powerful than a loud theory, because Clemente has tested the alternatives. He has walked through what else might explain the word. He has not ignored other possibilities. He has ruled them out based on the writing itself. That makes the conclusion feel earned. Still, it is important to say what this conclusion does not do. It does not identify the writer. It does not prove who took Nancy. It does not prove what happened inside her home. It does not prove whether Nancy was alive when the notes were written. It does not prove whether the ransom demand was genuine or fake. It does not prove whether the writer acted alone in every part of the case. It only says the notes themselves, according to Clemente's analysis, appear to come from one writer. But that—
Not a group. Not two people working together. One person sitting alone with a page, choosing words they thought would control the story.
That is the difference Clemente is pointing toward. He is not saying the notes are meaningless. He is saying they may mean something different from what they appear to say. That is the danger of reading a ransom note only on the surface. The surface says money. The deeper language may say control. The surface says group. The pronoun slip may say one person. The surface says transaction. The second note may say emotional motive. The surface says kidnapping. The tone shift may say something darker. That is why investigators do not simply read a ransom note once and move on. They read it repeatedly. They study what is repeated. They study what changes. They study what does not belong. They study what the writer seems to want the family to feel. Fear, urgency, confusion, hopelessness, obedience. And in the second note, the phrase, "With nature now," may have been designed to create a very different feeling from a normal ransom demand. It may have been designed to make the family imagine Nancy gone, or to make investigators question whether she was alive, or to shift the case away from negotiation, or to control the emotional ending of the story before anyone had found Nancy. That is what makes those words so chilling. They are short, but they change the room. The first note keeps a door open. Pay money and Nancy may come back. The second note, as described in the transcript, seems to close that door or at least darken it. It moves from possible return to possible loss. And if that was the writer's goal, then the note was not just a demand, it was psychological pressure. That is where Clemente's background matters. A handwriting expert looks at strokes, pressure, letters, and spacing. A lab tests paper, ink, folds, and physical traces. A profiler listens to the mind behind the words. Why this phrase? Why this tone? Why this shift? Why use plural language again and again? Why slip into singular language once? Why demand money first, then sound almost reflective later? Why make the second note feel less like a business transaction and more like a message? Those questions.
Now, here is where the known facts of the case intersect with Clemente's analysis in a way that cannot be ignored. The last person known to see Nancy Guthrie alive was her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, Nancy had dinner at her daughter Annie's house. Cioni drove her home and dropped her off at approximately 9:48 p.m. The garage door closed 2 minutes later. That was the last confirmed sighting of the 84-year-old. Less than 4 hours later, at 1:47 a.m., the doorbell camera stopped working. At 2:13 a.m., activity was detected. Approximately 16 minutes after that, Nancy's pacemaker stopped sending signals. Someone was inside the house for roughly 40 minutes. The timeline is tight. The window is narrow. And the person who put Nancy in that house that night was her son-in-law. Investigators searched Cioni's home. They conducted a second search that lasted several hours. Ashleigh Banfield, a former CNN and News Nation host, reported that law enforcement had seized a car belonging to Annie Guthrie and that Cioni was being treated as a prime suspect. She stood by that reporting, noting that Annie's car was towed and is in evidence, and that the cameras were smashed. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has publicly pushed back against these claims, stating that no family members are suspects. Sheriff Chris Nanos told the Daily Mail, "I understand the pundits are out there. They're going to say, well, he's the last one to see her alive. We understand that stuff. But, my goodness, you're putting a mark on somebody who could be completely innocent. And more important than that, he's family." But here is the question that sits at the center of this case. A question that reframes the entire story not as a headline, but as a thriller. If the last person to see Nancy Guthrie alive was her son-in-law, and if the ransom notes were written by one person pretending to be a group, and if that person slipped and wrote "me" instead of "us," then who was really in that house at 2:13 in the morning? The sheriff's department says the family has been cleared, but the evidence does not clear anyone. DNA was found at the scene. The FBI released footage of a masked individual. The ransom notes were sent to media outlets, not to the family directly, an unusual move that legal experts have called strange. And the second note, the one that said Nancy was buried with nature, arrived before the first deadline had even passed. The writer was not waiting for money. The writer was already moving to the next phase of the performance. Clemente has said that if the notes were not truly about ransom, there may be other motives that are dark. He has suggested Nancy could have been taken as a proxy or to get revenge on her family. The notes themselves contain a strange redundancy. "We have your mother, Nancy." As Clemente noted, that phrasing is oddly specific, almost as if the writer needed to remind themselves who they were talking about. One mind wrote the demand. One mind changed the tone. One mind used "we." One mind slipped into "me." The case does not end with a name.
Place physical evidence, but it gives investigators questions to ask. And good questions can change a case. Nancy's case needs good questions because there have been too many easy assumptions. A ransom note means money. Plural language means a group. A note means kidnapping. A second note means the same motive continued. But Clemente challenges each of those. Maybe money was not the motive. Maybe the group was not real. Maybe the notes were not straightforward ransom messages. Maybe the second note revealed more than the writer meant to show. That is why his analysis matters. It does not close the case. It opens a more precise direction, and that direction points toward one person behind the words. The emotional ending of this chapter has to return to Nancy, because language analysis can become fascinating, but it should never become detached from the person at the center. Nancy Guthrie was 84. She vanished. Her family is still waiting for answers. The notes are not puzzles for entertainment. They are part of the evidence left behind after a woman disappeared. Every word matters because Nancy matters. Every pronoun matters because the writer may know what happened to her. Every tone shift matters because it may reveal what the writer wanted, feared, or tried to hide. Clemente's work does not bring Nancy home tonight. It does not give her family the final answer, but it may cut away a false path, and that is something. If investigators were looking for a group, maybe they now look harder at a lone writer. If they were reading the notes only as money demands, maybe they now read them as psychological messages. If the writer thought the notes were airtight, maybe they were wrong. Because somewhere inside those sentences, surrounded by we and our, the writer may have accidentally stepped forward. Contact me. That word may be the smallest clue in the file, but small clues can carry heavy truth. One word can expose a false group. One word can reveal the writer's real position. One word can force investigators to rethink the notes. One word can narrow the search. And in a case where Nancy's family has waited too long for anything solid, narrowing the search matters. The mystery is not solved. The writer is not named. The case is not closed, but the note may have given investigators a thread, a quiet thread, a hidden thread, a thread the writer may never have realized they left behind. And if that thread is pulled the right way, it could lead back through the language, back through the fear, back through the false group voice, back through the ransom mask, and finally back to the person who wrote those words. One person, one note, one slip, and maybe, somewhere behind it, one answer Nancy Guthrie's family still deserves.
It does not end with an arrest. It does not end with Nancy Guthrie found. But the notes may have given investigators a thread. A quiet thread. A hidden thread. A thread the writer may never have realized they left behind. One word, me, pulling against the rest of the note. One word breaking the group illusion. One word suggesting the writer may have been alone. And if the writer was alone, then the question becomes not who wrote the notes, but why they were written this way. Why pretend to be a group? Why demand money in one note, then shift tone in another? Why say me after saying we? Why create a ransom frame if the deeper motive may not have been ransom at all? If you found this analysis compelling, like this video, share it with someone who follows this case, and subscribe to the Crime Infinity with notifications on, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. And the evidence, in this case, is pointing in one direction. One writer, one voice, one mistake, one word that may have cost the writer everything.